Neither am I.
Okay. Okay. Good morning, William E. Simpson II, equine specialist. So happy to have you here. And we want to talk about how wild horses can prevent wildfires. So I'm going to let you have the floor and explain how wild horses can prevent wildfires and why they are better at it, at least in some places, than livestock.
Certainly. So so I've pioneered this idea called Wild Horse Fire Brigade, and I've been living among wild horses up here in the wilderness for the last 7 years, studying them close up. I use a methodology that I learned when I was younger. I saw documentaries with Jane Goodall doing the work with the apes in Gombe, Africa, and I saw how she was able to get close enough to make brand new observations by getting the troop of apes to bring her in kind of like a family member. And so I'm doing the same thing. I'm taking a page out of her book. Took a few months for the horses to accept me, but then once they did, I was able to get close and start making a lot of really interesting and novel observations, which are very important, because if we're going to manage horses, we have to know everything we can about them. We need to know all about their behavioral ecology. And there's a lot of information out there right now that's all hearsay. Somebody have written it and they have read it from somebody else. There's a lot of people that rewrite the information that comes from really old, obsolete science about horses. On top of that, it's hard to get good observations. I mean, there are people out there that are dedicated to doing it. There's no doubt about it. But they get in their truck or their car and they drive out to an HMA where horses are already conditioned by the abuses by the BLM to be fearful of man. So as soon as they see a truck coming or a person, they're already either on their way out of the area. You see their rear ends at a distance, or they're on guard. They go into their the mode where they're ready to bolt. It's the flight or fight. So they're getting ready to flight because they're a prey animal. So they're going to a flight mode. So when you're in their space, it's very difficult to get a good observational data, because one, they're already acting differently because they see you and they're ready to run. So they're not engaged in normal behavior. And then two, you have to be there long enough, 24/7, day after day, season after season, watching with the perfect conditions to see all their different behaviors, which are critical. And so even though people make a good effort of doing it, going out there with a sandwich and telephoto lens that costs as much as most people's cars, they're not getting all the data, not even close. And it doesn't matter how many times you go out there, you're making snapshot observations. And that's what those are. You're not seeing the continuum of their life, which is what you really need. So I was lucky, because moving up here into the wilderness and then having the horses right here in the wilderness with me, and then having them accept me has given me some real, it's a privilege, number one, but number two, it lets me get close enough where I can observe the parasites on their coats. I can see injuries. I can, there's just so much data that I'm getting about what they're doing, what's happening in their lives, why they do this or that. And so, and which has led me to see how beneficial they are in a wilderness area as far as wildfire grazing. Because, when we're looking at all these public lands that are in contention, you've got over $10 trillion in large corporate conglomerates in America that all have interests in public lands. It's not just the livestock industry. You've got all the extraction industries, oil, gas, minerals. People don't realize the pharmaceutical industries, for instance, they're $4.5 trillion a year. That's more than the whole U.S. government's budget, by the way. Okay, by a factor of, I think, 2 or 3. $4.5 trillion a year. Well, what people don't realize is the pharmaceutical industries buy a lot of petroleum distillates. Okay, that's stuff that comes out of the oil industry, out of the ground, and they use a lot of minerals in all these prescriptions and over-the-counter drugs that consumers are buying. If they said, well, we're not going to be able to get these things anymore and you'll have to do without, you'd hear the biggest screams I mean, there'd be consumer outroar like you couldn't believe. So you've got all these people that all have an interest in this public land. There's a finite amount of it. And we also happen to have horses on some of it. So, and it's not a very good thing from the standpoint, if you're a wild horse, they co-evolved in North America for the last 1.7 million years. What's happened is in these areas where they're doing livestock and all these other activities, the predators are gone. Livestock production. And through that process, they've eliminated the co-evolved predator of the wild horses. Wild horses absolutely need their predators. It's a critical evolutionary link to their genetic vigor. If you take away the predator from a predator-prey relationship, you've just done the prey animal a big injustice.
Right.
It doesn't seem like it. People, oh, Bambi gets to live. Well, the problem is if you don't have the predator taking away the sick deer or the sick horses, for instance, and they walk around and spread disease, that's not good. If you have older horses that shouldn't be breeding, older stallions, we know in humans that when you have an older male, there's maybe somebody in their 60s or 70s, and a younger female, and they have a child, there's a high percentage of a genetic problem.
Right.
So we know these things. Now humans get away with it because modern medicine, we've kind of set ourselves up to avoid natural selection. But horses, all prey animals, deer, horses, elk, moose, all of those animals, they're all herbivores. They all require their co-evolved predator, which are uniquely able to make that special selection. They call that natural selection. So in these livestock areas where you have all these cattle and horses commingled, it's a bad deal for the horses because they don't have the predators to maintain population in equilibrium with that environment, which is an artificial environment because it's managed for all these different uses. It's not managed as wildlife area. It's managed for livestock production, oil extraction, etc. And they're not getting the benefit of the natural selection, which enhances the strength of their genes. So so that's an area where we should have horses removed and relocated into a wilderness area where they can be back with their natural predators again, because that benefits the horses. You've got way too many people who don't understand natural history or biology, who think putting horses with their predators is a bad thing. That shows the ignorance that some of the wild horse advocates have.
Yes.
They're actually so-called advocates that don't know anything about horses, and they go, oh, well, it's terrible. We can't let lions eat horses. Excuse me, that's been going on for 1.7 million years, and it's an important process. And when you've got these ignorant people who enter into the dialogue and say stupid things like that, all that does is serve to feed other hearsay, and you end up with policy that's formed on hearsay and obsolete science or fake science that leads to bad management, and that's what we're experiencing today. So you can't look at wildfire grazing with like one shoe fits all sizes. I mean, there's different things forestry does. They do prescribed burning, they do biomassing, they do mowing, and they want to do livestock grazing. Okay, now that makes sense because they make money. If you're the U.S. Forest or BLM and you've got an area that's not necessarily an existing dedicated livestock area, let's say you've got an HMA or some other area where they want to increase fire reduction or livestock grazing, as they call it, because it makes them money. They get paid for every cow, calf, animal out on the landscape. They get paid for that. So they don't get paid to put horses there. So that's a problem for the horses because of economics. It's not a function so much of the fact that the horse is a bad animal or anything. It's just that you've got governments who always want more money. You got corporations that are feeding the consumer demand cycle. And so if you can put a cow and a calf somewhere and get paid, then everybody's happier. Okay. And I'm talking about a majority of Americans, the consumers. But what do we do with all these horses? So in terms of fire grazing, we can't just put cattle anywhere and we can't just put horses anywhere. Okay. Horses are unique because when you look at a horse's hooves and a horse's teeth, their morphology, those parts, that's part of their morphology, have evolved in the North American continent with all the flora and fauna. Okay, they are part of everything that's in the environment. They grew up together with it for millions of years. And so when you look at a horse and you look at, for instance, their teeth, I have a horse skull here, and so this is the skull of an adult horse that was taken by a lion. And there's the eye socket, the nasal cavity, and you see his top front teeth. He's got some really nice teeth for grazing. And they also have bottom teeth. I don't have the bottom jaw in here, but so they got a really good set of top teeth. Well, that's important to know. Teeth and hooves matter when you're managing grazing. Okay, a cow, all ruminants, cows, deer, goats, they don't have top teeth. They just have a soft dental pad, and they have bottom teeth, and they have a prehensile tongue. So the way a ruminid, cows, sheep, all these different animals that graze, that are livestock from Africa, the way they graze is they grab the grass or the plant, and then they pull their bottom teeth across it like a sickle or a scythe, and they cut it off. And so there's some tugging involved, and some plants become uprooted. Horses, because of that clean top and bottom teeth, they just chop it off like a lawnmower, so they don't pull roots out. That's a misconception. And so that's important because coupled with their single stomach, their post-gastric digesters, all that means is when they eat the seeds of native plants, they poop them out and they grow. And so horses, we can put horses into areas like our national forests and designated wilderness areas that have endangered plants and grasses, flora. We can put horses there because they belong there. They grew up there. They're symbiotic to the plants. The plant gives the horse food, and what the horse does for the plant is it reseeds it. So everybody wins. That's a symbiotic relationship. You don't have a symbiotic relationship with cattle and the local plants here. Okay, that is a parasitic relationship. Cows will eat the native plants and digest the seeds, and that's it. There's no propagation of those plants at that point. So you strip off your landscape. Now, if you're livestock grazing in areas where you can reseed and you can manage the land with tractors and all that, that's fine. Or if you're in areas where you don't have endangered, threatened flora, okay, that's maybe a trade-off for making money on grazing. Okay, but in our areas where we have endangered plants and grasses in these designated wilderness areas, we can't afford to lose those native plants. And the reason is those native plants also have co-evolved fauna. So that's different animals, birds, mammals, and things that evolved requiring these native plants. If those native plants get stripped off, we lose that wildlife. And then you have a collapse of the ecosystem. You can't start taking various species out without having a collapse of the ecosystem. They're all connected. And the horse is what they call a keystone herbivore because they kind of hold the whole thing together. Their grazing reduces fire, and it reduces it in a way that also helps propagate plants at the same time. So not only do they reduce the vegetation, which makes fires normal, then less fuel equals less heat, just like a fireplace. When you want it to be hotter, what do? You throw more logs on, or you turn the gas up, right? So when we reduce the fuel, and grass and brush are the primary fuels in most fires, you look at, there's almost a grass and brush component to every fire. And then we have fires in California and other places that are strictly grass and brush that devastate entire cities, and towns. You look at Paradise, you look at Coffee Park, you look at Big Sur that was burning just a little, and maybe it's still burning now, I don't know, but that was just a few weeks ago. All grass and brush, devastating everything. So what we can do is we've got this problem where commingled cattle and horses are in some of these HMAs where there's no predators. They've been eliminated with extreme prejudice to enhance livestock production. We understand that's been going on for 300 years. So this notion that, we'll reestablish these areas, we'll put predators back in, we'll do this, we'll do that. No, you won't, because you've got all these big corporations that have more money than the entire US government who are making money on these public lands.
Yeah, they're not going to give it
managing
up.
them the way they want to. They're not going to give it up.
Yeah, they're not
That's a
gonna give it
fairy
up.
tale.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people believe that, or they're off their meds or something. The bottom line is that land is going to get used the way these big corporations want to use it. And we have realistically, we have very little say, because guess what? We're the ones supporting it. Consumers are supporting it with our dollars. So it's hypocritical for people to say, unless you live on a mountain and you're eating like grass and seeds and you have zero carbon footprint and you don't buy anything, you're not buying a Tesla car, you're not buying a laptop, all these things that need copper and cobalt and lithium that are coming off these public lands, or you're not eating meat, then, if any of those people that buy those things and eat meat and things like that, who are complaining about the way the public lands are being used, are being hypocrites. They're being a hypocrite because they're voting to do that with their dollars. Their consumer dollars are saying, do that, do that. So we got this conundrum here. We got these horses that are commingled on these areas with all these livestock. What do? Well, if we break it apart and we put these wild horses back into the wilderness where they evolved, where they belong, they've been there for millions and millions of years. Thank goodness that we weren't here as longer than we've been here. Humans have been on the planet about 250,000 years, more or less. Horses have been here on North America for 1.7 million years. They did great right up until the time we showed up and started doing what we do. So putting them back in the wilderness, there couldn't be a better thing you could do. It's completely natural. It's exactly where they belong with their predators. It's exactly where they belong because their populations are controlled, they stay in equilibrium, and they reduce this wildfire fuel. And by putting the few horses, we don't have that many horses, by the way. When we look at how many horses there used to be, there's some people saying there may be as many 20 million horses, 50 million bison back, not, hundreds of years ago, of course, but even in the early 19th century, we had 2 million horses in North America, free roaming, okay? We've got 7.5 million domestic horses in America today. So they've done very well over the millions of years in the wilderness. So putting them back there is not only the wise thing to do, it saves the horses, it'll preserve them, it'll conserve those wild horses in a way that also protects the forest. And what happens when you protect the forest from fire? When you reduce fire back to the normal realm, what happens is you get slow burning, low burning fire. It's not nearly as hot because there's less fuel. And then the fire evolved trees that need some fire to reproduce, they benefit again. They don't get destroyed. They actually benefit. And then the wildlife doesn't get burned alive. You have a more normal wildfire regime. And so we've got to get to that point somehow. And we know that these mega herbivores, they call them large body herbivores or megafauna. Horses are a large bodied herbivore. They weigh about 1,000 pounds roughly, an adult horse. So we put a horse out there, each horse eats 5.5 tons of grass and brush a year. Mm-hmm. So when you start looking at, well, what is that value proposition to taxpayer? Who benefits? Right. If we untangle the livestock horse thing and we put the cattle where they belong and the horses where they belong, how does everybody benefit from that? Well, right off the bat, we save the money by not putting them in holding pens and feeding them grass, okay, which costs a lot of money. We don't need to round them up with helicopters. Yeah, we're saving about 100 million a year. And it's getting worse because now they say there's going to be 60,000 horses by the end of this year in holding, maybe probably more. So we take them out and we put them in the wilderness. Well, just in that single act, we're saving a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars. That's taxpayer money that you and I and everybody listening pays for. Right there is big savings, but the real savings, I think, comes into play by saving our champion trees and our remaining critical wilderness. We don't have enough horses to just put them everywhere or anywhere. We have to be very careful, and we have to find the most sensitive areas that we need total protection now. We need to restore the herbivory, which was protecting these forests for all these years. We know there, before the Pliocene period, going back, we know from Dr. Faith at the University of Utah, we know that there was no catastrophic wildfire in North America. When we had the megafauna, we had 300 million more large body herbivores like horses and bigger. When that was in place on the continent, there was no catastrophic fire. It didn't exist for millions of years, none. And they know that now. There's a lot of published peer-reviewed story. Somebody can go look up Dr. Faith, F-A-I-T-H. He's at Utah University, and he's a curator of the museum there. You know, there's a ton of studies that show there was no fire in North America when we had the megafauna that were keeping the grass and brush grazed down. No catastrophic fire. We had normal fire, which were small, low burning, cooler burning fires that are needed on the landscape. Those fires are part of normal cyclic wildfire, okay? We need that. We don't, catastrophic fire is a whole different animal. And people need to understand that. It's not, all fire is not good. When you get these super hot fires, and it's because of mismanagement. So, so we put the horses in the wilderness, and they're better in that area than the livestock because they don't strip the native crops, which of course gives soil stabilization, protect the trees, provide food for coeval fauna. There's all these benefits. And then when you reduce fire, what you're doing now is we're entering into the economics of fire losses, insured losses, uninsured losses, fire suppression. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars a year now. I think Courthouse News reported in 2018 that just the fires in California, insured and uninsured losses were $180 billion. Now, we think in terms of these catastrophic finances related to fire, and we don't even know what the smoke's doing. People, we know, American Heart and Lung Association is saying that, this smoke is more dangerous than we ever knew. There's people that are during fires that are getting sick and going to hospital and all these other things. We don't even know what that cost is yet. We haven't even done that calculation. That could eclipse this billions of dollars we're talking about. Health is not getting cheaper. Healthcare is getting more expensive with time. And so if we made just a tiny difference, if we put the few horses we have into select wildernesses that need protection, like trees, we have these champion trees. Okay, these are these trees that are 5,000 years old. They've seen thousands of fires, but now for the first time in history, they're being destroyed by this new catastrophically hot fire. They're being destroyed because they can't take it. It's too hot. So we've got to save these champion trees. And there's not many left. A lot of them are getting destroyed. So we put the horses up there. We save these trees. We do all this nice stuff. We protect the landscape from erosion. We keep the plants going. That protects the streams and the salmon and trout. So it's all connected. You got to have your keystone herbivores. And that's where we save the money by, I think, not only saving the cost of the BLMs, warehousing horses and rounding them up, but we're saving on the wildfire side of this thing big time. And then, so you've got all these secondary and tertiary benefits. In lands where you can manage the soil and the landscape, with equipment, a lot of these flat lands, ag lands, valley basins and things where you can manage it, it makes sense to use cattle and sheep there, of course. And then in the cities, even in the urban areas, you can use goats. They're a small animal. They're not going to wipe out a car if you hit it. And unfortunately, animals do get hit. Deer, cows, horses too, all get hit by cars. That's nothing new. But you can use goats, and they have been using goats successfully in cities. Around airports, industrial areas, they use herds of goats. So we have to use the right herbivore in the right area.
Right.
That's what's critical here. So tax savings, the benefits, you can't even hardly begin to calculate them because we haven't done all the math as to what these wildfires are really costing. That's why the insurance companies have bailed out of the whole wildfire market. You can't, in this state where I'm living, California and many parts of Oregon, you cannot get wildfire insurance. You cannot get it, which means if you're a young couple trying to buy your first home and you need to buy fire insurance, you have to go to like Lloyd's of London or somewhere like that who will take an exceptional risk and you pay the exceptional premium. I've talked to people.
One more reason to support a natural way to prevent wildfires. I mean, who isn't afraid of fire? Because, you know, that is like the universal fear. You know, not everyone is afraid of heights and not everyone's afraid of hurricanes or drowning. But when you talk about like what is the one thing that just about every human is terrified of, it would be a fire. And anytime that you can prevent a fire, why would you not be on board with that? And if you can lower your taxes and save property, because it's not just a question of like saving your taxes, but it's also if you lose your home, you know, then you've lost your home. So that's a whole other issue as well. So there's basically every reason to support this. I do have a couple of questions. You know, the Bureau of Land Management has been rounding up so many of our wild horses that we hardly have any left. And their herd sizes, you know, in certain areas, if you look at their website, the numbers are like 2 or 10 or 20, which is insane. And we know scientifically and ecologically that's incorrect. So what would you think would be like a healthy, sustainable band of horses or a herd of horses in a particular area? Because it's obviously not 2 or 10.
Well, the first thing we need to understand is it's not just about the total number of horses, and you're right. If you get below, there's different opinions out there, but you know, I tend to be on the page that we need about 250 adults, you know, breeding adults out there to maintain genetic diversity. But you cannot have that many horses in an area without their natural predators. It's the whole enchilada. If you don't have the whole equation, it's a flawed program, okay? So just by changing the AML, let's say we could do that. Let's say you and I and the audience out there, we say we have the power now. We're taking it away from the $10 trillion corporations, and we get to say what happens. And we go, okay, there's going to be AML 250. If we do that, we're going to end up with large herds of sick, genetically defective horses in a couple of decades. Because what's going to happen is you're not going to have all the natural processes, specifically natural selection, happening with these horses, and you will have overpopulation because the apex predators that are co-evolved predators of wild horses in North America, contrary to what the BLM says, which is a bunch of bunk, all predators in North America, wolves, coyotes, lions, bears, all eat wild horses and they all prey upon them. Okay, mountain lions, that's their preferred diet is horse. So if you don't keep your horses with the proper number in the right ecosystem, you've mismanaged it. You've got to have all the important parts more working. It worked for 1.7 million years. We can't suddenly do it a new way without bad results, okay? There was a reason why it worked so good for so long, and we need to respect that. That's the problem. You've got a lot of advocates out there that are ignorant in science, they're ignorant in natural history, and they really don't know very much about wild horses when it comes right down to it. So what do we do? Well, we have to untangle, and a lot of these HMAs, untangle the horses from the livestock, because the HMAs where a lot of these horses and livestock are commingled don't have the predators required. They took them away with great prejudice. They wiped them out on purpose. They've been gone for a long time too. It's not recent. They've been gone for hundreds of years. Cowboys have been shooting those predators for 300 years now. And then the BLM and the U.S. Forest came in with helicopter hunters and professional guide hunters who just massacre everything. Okay, so we can separate it out, and then you're right. We need to look at AMLs in the areas where we rewild them or relocate horses. And there's 2 sides to the Wild Horse Fire Brigade. One is rewilding. That means you're taking them out of pens where they're already been captured, or putting them into economically and ecologically appropriate wilderness areas. Okay, that's rewilding. But then we also need to do relocating. Now, we got roundups that are going to continue to happen. We're not going to stop that. This notion that PZP is going to suddenly stop roundups is a bunch of crap.
It never has. In fact, it never has. It's actually made things worse.
Happen.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing too. Even if it did stop roundups, it's a horrible thing to do because you're engaged in selective breeding. And as soon as you start deciding which animals breed and which ones don't, you're going to cause genetic erosion, and which is the worst thing you can do to wildlife. It is the worst thing. So actually, in my opinion, and I can show the science, they don't understand it because it's hard to explain science to ignorant people that don't have this academic background. You got to have two things. You got to have the academic background and empirical experience. So I've been lucky because I got trained to be a scientist, and then I have the empirical experience living with the horses and seeing how they work. So the thing we've got to do is we've got to educate people. Okay, here's how it really works. We can't just change the ML. That's not going to work. And these areas that are all screwed up, that doesn't work. PZP doesn't work because now you're using human will. You're inflicting your will on wildlife, and it's an ignorant will. We don't know what we're doing when we do that. PZP works in certain areas only. It has a very tiny window of application, which is in zoos where you have to really control your population. But in a zoo, they do extensive genetic study on the animals they're treating, and they have like, if you were doing horses in a zoo, they had some Pralsky horses in a zoo. They have a stud book, and they know every stud and every mare and all their genetics, and they've studied some of the alleles and what have you, so they know genetic traits related to alleles. Those guys are doing it probably the best we can with the science we have today, which is still not perfect. Our science is far from perfect, even today. It's better than it was in '71 when we did the Wild Horse and Burro Protection Act, but it's still imperfect. So when you use PZP, you're engaged in selective breeding, you're doing genetic damage to America's wild horses, flat out, period. And that doesn't even consider that the guys who really did some real work on PZP and darting horses was Marburg and Krieger, and they wrote a large document. It's a published scientific study about darting horses in, I think, 1964. And so they weren't politicized. They were saying, here's what happens. A well-placed dart by a marksman, it hits a large animal correctly placed, can still cause bleeding, hematoma, broken bones, and even death in large animals. So just that alone, when you look at the process of darting horses and the adverse effect and the chance of darting over and over again, some horses are getting darted more than once. What's that do? We have no idea. We don't even really know what PZP on a chemical basis is doing to these horses as far as being a carcinogen, because it is a suspected carcinogen. So when we look at these things, there's so many reasons that show PZP is the wrong thing to do on free roaming wild horses. You know, really on Assateague Island, it's a misapplication of the use. And people say, well, you know, Bill, we can't have a starving, see, because you've got finite grazing on an island. You got so many horses. Nature, the way natural selection works is if you start getting too many horses for the amount of food, some horses die. That's natural selection. What it does is the ones that die, by the way, are the weaker horses. The strong horses can live, but the problem is when you got tourism, you can't have little kids seeing, you know, horse skeletons and dying horses and starving horses. But that's what nature will do. And for humans who don't understand it's an important part of nature. It's sad to see Bambi getting taken down by a lion. Trust me, I see it out here. I see baby horses taken down by packs of vicious coyotes ripping a baby horse to pieces. But it's been going on for 1.7 million years, and the fact that we had such a plethora of wild horses when we became beings on the planet 200,000 years ago tells us that nature has been doing it the right way. It looks brutal to us, but there is a wisdom there that we don't really, emotionally we have trouble with it, but there is a solid, empirically proven wisdom that we need to respect. Now, and I don't mean to come across as some heartless guy, these horses are like family to me. So when I find a friend, you know, that's ripped apart, not easy. Not easy. So, but I also have to realize that that's part of nature's way of doing what's right for the horses for the long run. It's not about the next 10 years, the next 20 years. It's about the next 100 years. Will there even be horses in America in 100 years? Not if we don't get Wild Horse Fire Brigade done. They'll be gone. The way we're doing it right now, they're going to be all dead. Basically, we'll have some domestic horses that all have genetic diseases from inbreeding. And almost every breed has a genetic disease from inbreeding. So we have to conserve our horses, and we have to do it properly. And the way to do it is rewilding. We take them out of the government holding, save that money, put them in the forest, and then relocating. So we bait in family units. We use baiting and cowboys, bait in the whole family band, stallion and all, and then taking them as a family unmolested.
Right.
We don't treat them. We don't cut the stallion. They're natural, and we put them in the wilderness. We don't need to mess with their biological processes. We got to put them in there naturally, because now we're going to put them back with their predators. So it all works. We don't need to prove anything. It worked for 1.7 million years. It's going to work again. What we're doing is failing. What we're doing is failing. And the advocates supporting it are failed people, because they're not smart enough to get over their own egos and the money that's incentivizing them to start doing what's logical and proven to be right. But not only that,
all of the groups like Return to Freedom and Humane Society, they push the path forward, which basically is the extinction plan. And even Suzanne Roy's group, American Wild Horse Campaign, they're pushing PZP. Number one, it was a lie, because they said it would stop. They said it would stop roundups. It's actually increased roundups, right? It's crazy. But also, the BLM has come out and said, at least for the last couple of years, they hardly even use PZP. They're using Gonacon, which sterilizes them. There was a study done on the horses. They were like a healthy herd up at Teddy Roosevelt, and now they're all inbred and they're sick because they've all been shut up with the drugs. But not only that, they use a lot of the volunteers, like you said. It's not like a licensed veterinarian with a sharpshooter. These are like middle-aged women volunteers shooting a moving target. I mean, that's insane. You know, that's just crazy.
Well,
and they promote that.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. You know, Suzanne Roy, Netta DeMeo, Laura Lee, they've never studied wild horses in a wilderness area. Okay.
No,
they spend a lot of time getting the dramatic photos, to pull heartstrings, to get donations, to try to stop a BLM freight train coming down the tracks. And when you just have to untie the kids from the tracks, you don't need to stop the train. We're not going to stop that train. It ain't happening. So as soon as we acknowledge what we can and can't do, we can start moving in the right direction. We can't stop what's going on public lands, because $10 trillion in money says no. That's what happens. Okay, if every advocate could write a check to all the congressmen and senators for $100,000 for their campaign to get reelected, they'd listen to us, I guarantee it. But no, we're not doing that. These big corporations are. So guess who runs the House and the Senate?
They do.
And the presidency. They do, of course.
They do.
So, but what people that the organizations, you know, campaign against America's wild horses and these other, you know, return to confinement and these other organizations that you mentioned, the bottom line is they don't understand wild horse behavioral ecology. They don't. If they really did, and if they really were working in the highest best interest of horses, they would know PZP is the worst thing. And there's some things that I'm just publishing. I'm working with a scientist at Arizona State now. We're going to co-author a paper, but I've discovered brand new information about how family bands work. And so one of the things that I'll reveal in this interview is one of my recent findings is there's actually a subtle competition between mares and for hierarchy. And the lead mare is like the matriarchal elephant. The lead mare has the most experience. She gives the stallion babies reliably. She knows where to go, when to go where, she knows the whole drill. She knows the ropes. She's the expert. And then the lesser mares, the inferior mares, learn from her, but have a lesser standing in the harem. Okay, now, why is that important? Well, most people don't know this, and I'm going to tell you this is the first time other than what I've written about it. What's interesting and what I see out here in all the family bands is not only does the lead mare decide when and where the band will go and when they go, but her baby has a significant survival advantage over the other babies in the harem. So they usually all get pregnant about the same time of the year, usually within a month or two of each other in the spring, normally. And usually the lead mare will have her baby somewhere in the mix. But what happens is when that lead mare's baby hits the ground, if that baby, for instance, takes an extra hour to get up, that herd will stay there until that lead mare decides to move. That band will not move, okay? But if an inferior mare, let's say the omega mare has a baby on the ground, just dropped a baby, and then the lead mare decides they're going to move, the band moves. So that mare has to make a decision between staying with her baby who can't stand yet for some reason or another, or she loses the family band. She's by herself with her baby and she'll probably get depredated.
Right.
So usually that mare will leave the baby, abandon the baby. So we see empirically, and nobody has written about this. Nobody knows this or talks about it. This is the first time I'm on air talking about it. But what I see is that there's a significant survival advantage to the lead mare's baby. Okay, that baby is like a princess or a little prince. He has special privileges. Why is that important? Well, why is that important? It's because the lead mare is going to raise that foal and put all of her knowledge into that baby right off the bat, because that baby's in intimate contact with that mare. Okay. Now, what happens is if some idiot with a PZP gun shoots that lead mare, you lose all the matriarchal knowledge, gone to the family band, and the stallion will reject her because stallions can sense if a mare is fertile or not. And if a mare loses her fertility, he abandons her, and then the next mare moves up immediately in the rank, and that mare may not be ready. What does that do? Well, now the family band has a leader, the lead mare, maybe doesn't know all the ropes, doesn't know this or that, and that's not good. That's not good for the entire band. So they're interrupting with these very important social dynamics that they do not understand.
Right.
You know, Susan Roy, I mean, I've talked to Susan Roy and Denise Dobo on the phone one day for an hour, and it was real apparent after about the first 30 minutes that they don't know anything about wild horses. They pose by them, they go out to the, they're great at posing and looking, they got rounded up PTSD horses. They've never been in the wilderness around wild horses. They've never done it. And I mean being right among the band where you can see what's going on. You can smell them. You can see the parasites on them. You can identify the parasites. That's how close I get because I've been brought in as like a family member. And so that leads me to some new important information that helps guide us in how we got it. And plus I see the predation. I have over 100 photos, forensic photos of different depredations by every predator here: coyote depredation, lion depredation, bears, all of it. And so I've got the empirical data, the empirical experience. So I do know what I'm talking about here. And I know what I'm talking about academically, empirically with regard to wild horse behavioral ecology, and because I fought fire in the past. I know about cattle. I worked in the logging industry. I have this empirical experience, and I was a CEO of a fairly large corporation. I understand economics. We got funded by Wall Street at 107 employees. So get it, been there, done that, got the hat and the t-shirt. So when I put it all together and I look at the problem, uncompromisingly, I'm not going to compromise anything because I'm looking for money. I'm looking for the limelight. Those things don't matter to me. In fact, I've financed my entire studies up here, which has been very significant, by the way, out of my own back pocket, out of my savings. So my retirement. And so I'm not doing this for the money. I'm not getting paid. I'm doing this because I really want to see these horses safe. When you look at all these other organizations, you have to ask, what is their motive? When they're doing the wrong thing every day, when they're promoting the wrong thing, you have to say, why? What is this motivation? And then real quickly, you read their 990 IRS submissions and how much money they got and what they're paying each other. And then you go, okay, there it is right there. They're paying for their home, they're paying for their car, they're paying their salary. You know, there's the incentive to do what they're doing. They don't want that gravy train to end. And so they don't like Wild Horse Fire Brigade, because Wild Horse Fire Brigade is a holistic solution. Done deal. You put the horses back where they belong, they take care of themselves, like they did for 1.7 million years. They did it. You know, they didn't need us. That's what people need to remember. These horses were here 1.7 million years on the same landscape. They never needed us. They do fine on their own. When we meddle, that's when everything turns to crap.
Right. And who isn't afraid of wildfire, you know?
Everybody. Yeah, I mean,
everybody, right? Everybody.
I mean, fire, the thing about fire is it's nonpartisan. It doesn't observe county lines. It doesn't observe jurisdictions. It kills with equal prejudice. It'll burn a deer, it'll burn an eagle, it'll burn a horse, it'll burn any animal in its way. Catastrophic fire will destroy anything that it comes in contact with, including our homes. It doesn't matter if you got Firewise, you can clear the brush back 100 feet. You know, what people don't realize, the Eagle Creek fire on the Oregon side of the Columbia River was burning. It jumped to 1 mile of water. 1 mile of the went across the entire Columbia River, 1 mile away. I mean, if that isn't a good fire break, I don't know what is. 1 mile of water, you know, who can put a mile of water around their house? Didn't work. The fire went from Oregon to Washington, across the river, lit Washington on fire. You can look it up, Eagle Creek fire. So the solution is you get the fuel down. When you bring the fuel down, then the fires aren't so hot. It doesn't matter if the wind blows. If there's less fuel, nothing's going to happen. Talk to any blacksmith. If he doesn't have fuel in the forge, he can pump his bellows all he wants, and he doesn't get a hotter fire. He's got to have enough fuel in there. It's fire combustion. You know, I don't think any of these women that are running these organizations, Netta DeMeo or Susan Roy or Denise Doble or Laura Lee, I don't think they've got a background in science. I don't think they can do the chemistry of combustion. You know, you got to know these things to understand fire. You got to know these things to understand horses. You can't just like take a picture and do this and that. Okay, now I'm an expert. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, no one else is really bringing up how wild horses have done this actually on their own all along. We just didn't know about it at the time, and it could continue to do it. But one thing that is like universal is everyone is terrified of fire, and if you can find a way to prevent wildfire, and not only that, but not just the terror of being seeing the wildfire in the distance, but the cost to taxpayers to put out the fire, the loss of life, of course, wildlife, but also the loss of human life, property damage. I mean, all that gets factored into the economy. You know, if your business goes up in a fire, you're out of business. So that means your employees aren't working, you're not paying taxes. So it's literally like a domino effect. So it's not just a one thing, like a piecemeal thing. It's like the whole scenario. But also they use a lot of toxic chemicals to put out the fire. All the manpower that's addressing the fire when they could be addressing some other natural disaster, or your taxes could be going to, you know, public schools, healthcare, roads, any number of things that obviously we have let go. So there's all of that too. So it kind of makes you wonder why no one is really promoting something that already exists. So you're not even coming up with anything new. You're just saying, this has already been going on. We just need to stop rounding up the horses, stop darting them with toxic chemicals, and just let nature do what it's designed to do, and be done with it. Of course, we have to stop the roundups because we're not going to have any wild horses to do this if we continue. That's another problem too.
Yeah, and most of the HMAs, we do have to get rid of the commingled horses and livestock, you know.
Right.
And the livestock are never going to come off the landscape. That's not going to happen. So we've got in those HMAs, and there are some legitimate HMAs like Priors. The Priors have a resident population of predators. So, you know, and the Ochocos, you look at Big Summit, that's 8,000 feet. They get 20 feet of snow up there. The Big Summit herd has been there for hundreds of years, and the population stays about 120 horses. Why? Because they have predators. Okay, they have environmental stresses. You know, they got to deal with the altitude. They're at 8,000 feet. They got 20 feet of snow, but that herd's been there for hundreds of years. So we have to undo all these artificial horse management areas because they don't work. So there, a lot of these areas are just they've always been, for a lot of them for 300 years, have been just livestock production. And then the horses got trapped into that when they drew these boxes in 71. They got trapped into these areas where they probably shouldn't have been. And realistically, if you do your homework and you go back and look at the history of livestock production, when they were doing big cattle drives, you know, 200-300 years ago, they were getting horses from the Native Americans and rounding up wild horses and running them with the cattle drive so they'd have spare horses for mounts. And so horses, and they did thousands and thousands of cattle drives, right? So horses got dislocated and pushed into new areas where they hadn't been before. Do you think for a minute, if you were a wild horse, you'd want to be in some desert wasteland in a supposed HMA where you've got to walk 20 miles to get your water and 20 miles to get your minerals and 20 miles to graze? No, we don't need to do that. See, that's the thing. There's a paradise for horses right here where I am. It's like paradise for horses. All of our horses have body scores of 4s and 5s. I mean, you know, we don't see starving horses up here. We've got tons of forage. See that you got people out there like Eric Mulvey. His brain is like on the sage, you know, step book, the sage step out there by the Rocky Mountains. He doesn't understand the landscape out here. We probably have 10 million acres of wilderness, designated wilderness. We only need 20 million acres, and we can put one horse for 250 acres and use every horse in America. If we took, let's say we had 100,000 horses all in, free roaming and holding, and we took them all and put them in the wilderness, and we put them in these wildernesses with tons of forage and water where we're talking about here, out here in the Pacific. You could put one horse at 200 acres and you'd only use 20 million acres of the 110 million acres of designated wilderness. So you're only using 1/5 of it. So we have to be very selective because we have to figure out which wilderness areas have the trees, these ancient champion trees we need to protect that have this ancient wildlife and the you know, this very sensitive, amazing ecosystem that few areas have left. We need to put those keystone herbivores, those wild horses, back there and leave them alone. But you've got people that don't understand science, they don't understand wild horses, that are being incentivized for other reasons, ego and finances, who have engaged in this whole disaster of PZP. And you know, the BLM is just carrying out the orders from way up above. You know, the big corporations tell the congressmen, and then they pass laws and tell the BLM what they're going to do. It has nothing to do with the BLM. It has nothing to do with the ranchers. They're the soldiers way down at the bottom. The generals are the big $10 trillion a year corporations that are running this whole show. We're not going to beat them. We're not going to get control of these public lands. It's not happening. And the sooner we realize that, the better, because aside from the ecological disaster the current management is with commingled horses and livestock, we're wasting millions and millions of dollars, and we're wasting probably hundreds of millions because by having the horses locked up in jail when they could be out there reducing wildfire fuels in these areas.
Total waste. Yeah.
You were talking about the cost of fire. The cost of fire is in the hundreds of billions of dollars a year now, all in. When you look at the suppression, when you look at equipment, when you look at men, you got firefighters that are on workers' comp from smoke. You've got the direct burns, you know, people being killed. You've got homes lost. We had a big fire up here in Southern Oregon, Talent and Phoenix. They call it the Alameda fire. I don't know why, probably to distract you from the towns that actually burned. Not a little political trick, you know, but the towns of Talent and Phoenix, Oregon were devastated. They lost 800 homes. There are no 300 homes, 800 people made homeless. So that was a grass and brush fire. It wasn't a forest fire. It was all grass. It was right on the I-5 corridor. The grass and brush was 3-4 feet tall, caught on fire, boom. Fire blew it up, burned all these, you know, right through town with cement, sidewalks and streets, right, decimated everything. The brand new bank there is, you know, this bank was built to the highest code, metal roof, destroyed. I went in and took pictures of the vault, the steel vault and the concrete. I mean, even the stuff in that fire was so hot, it cooked papers in the vault.
That's
You know, it was
crazy.
like, I went in there, I said, oh, look at this, you know? So, yeah, so if we manage them, if we take Wild Horse Fire Brigade, which just, I took nature's lessons and kind of said, okay, here's how we do it. And we have a law we can do it with right now, called the Humane Transfer Act. It's in the appropriations bill. It says that any state or town or municipality, CAL FIRE, state forestry, any town or city can request horses from the BLM and the U.S. Forest, and they got to give them to them. And so they magically turn from being wild horses to work animals under this Transfer Act. But the interesting thing is when you read the protections that come with them, when you get them and they become your work animals, let's say I'm a town, let's say I'm the town of Wairika or Medford, and I get 500 horses. Now they're my work animals. There's rules. I got to take care of them just like they're as good as I do any livestock of mine. So I can't let them go. There's all these regulations. Can't let them go into any animal products. You can't slaughter them. You can't sell them for slaughter. Can't sell them for animal products. You have to, they are fully protected when they get them. So they have to take care of these animals now. And quite frankly, I trust my county to take care of them better than the BLM does.
Right.
So, because they're local. I have more influence on my local politicians than I do on federal politicians and their minions. So they get these horses, and then we already have the next step, which is, okay, what does the county do or a city do when they get the horses? Well, they can go to their local forestry district ranger for the national forest, the federal forest, and they could say, hey, we know that you have deals to put livestock grazing into the forest every year. They've already, this is being done and nobody talks about it, but I've got paperwork that shows that even our county, Siskiyou County, is doing this. They have a deal with the Klamath National Forest, and they support the local ranchers putting livestock up into the national forest. Well, this is bad, and they haven't even done NEPA. So, I mean, they're damaging the flora up there and the landscape. They're damaging the ground. You know, there's all the problems with cattle. So we know that that's already being done. So if you're a town and you've got livestock, work animals, you can do the same thing because it's standard operating business. Okay, so what we do is we say, okay, county, you know, you've got an area of wilderness that's in your county bounds. You reach out to that federal land manager, whether it's state forester or federal forester, and you say, I've got these work animals, and we know you're spending money trying to reduce fuel. And oh, by the way, you can't do prescribed burn in the wilderness, designated wilderness. No motorized vehicles, no livestock grazing, no prescribed burns, no chemicals. So those areas, all the tools that the forest department has, they can't even use them in designated wilderness. So you've got to reinstate the herbivory in those areas. So through a memorandum of agreement, the county with some federal land manager of a wilderness area, you can actually put horses up there and get it done. So they ended up either rewilded or relocated, and you probably get a window of time. You know, you sign an agreement and say, okay, we're going to put X number of horses, let's say it's 500, into this particular area, and we're going to do it for a period of 2 years, and we're going to have graduate students from this university watching, because that's what they want to do. It's called make work. You know, politicians like to make work. So you got to bring the universities in. Somebody's got to get some money, all that kind of stuff. But they'd study it. That's fine. We know it works. It worked for 1.7 million years. Why is it not going to suddenly work now, right? So that's fine. They can do that. But we could put these horses out there, and you get a window to fill up your 500 horse allocation. So what happens is, if you can't necessarily get rewilded horses immediately when they're doing these roundups, we can go to the BLM and say, you know, we're going to get these horses. We've applied under the Transfer Act, and we want 500 horses. And they'll say, okay, we're going to start rounding up this area. We'll say, oh, by the way, we want them unmolested. We want intact stallions. We want untreated mares, because we're going to put them into an area where their natural predators are, which we know science says, and all the history that we've got, millions of years, their populations will be held in equilibrium with the environment. That's a fact. So you get them, and then you rewild them as family bands. And then what's nice, and what I see up here is, you know, I ended up getting I got 4 geldings, and that I adopted because they were going to go to slaughter from the Navajo. And I put them up here And it is kind of interesting because I got a one-eyed stallion. He's a gorgeous stallion. Beautiful conformation. I mean, this horse, I could put him in a show ring if I brushed him and, you know, did his hooves and what have you, and he'd probably win prizes. But he lost an eye. With a, we don't know whether a lion ran him into some trees at night and he punctured his eye out, or he got clawed out. He lost an eye. So he can't put together a harem of mares. He's not competitive with the other champion stallions, which is another important part of natural selection. People don't realize you start castrating these stallions and putting them back out on the range, what you're doing is you're also impacting that side of the natural selection, because you have to have enough bachelors competing for breeding rights to figure out who the champion is. And the champion, when these stallions are competing, is the one who's the smartest, the fastest, the strongest. That is the stallion you want breeding. Not the weakest or the guy who's not too sharp, right? So when you screw with the stallion population, you're also messing up natural selection. You're screwing it up on that side of it. So PZP is decimating all kinds of things on the mare side of things. And then you got people castrating stallions and putting them back out on the range, and that's decimating everything else. You know, what happens is, and when a stallion becomes too old and a younger stallion comes into his family band and takes over, a strong stallion who's fought competition and won the rights and then challenges a band stallion and wins, then that old stallion will retire himself. But he doesn't retire entirely. What he does is he goes out on the range and he becomes a mentor to the bachelors. And we see that out here. See, people don't see these things. An old stallion will become a mentor to 2-year-olds, and they'll hang out with him and he'll teach them things. He shows them the ropes because he knows he was a champion. He's got all the wisdom. He had a family. He knows how it works. And so when you take those guys and you castrate them or you mess with them, you change their personality. He's not the same guy anymore. And it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy of the highest order when you're PZPing mares and castrating stallions. It couldn't be the worst thing you could do. And the thing is a lot of women who have taken birth control themselves, they seem to be fine with inflicting their will on other women. These mares, don't they have a right of deciding if, you know, did they ask them, do you want to have birth control? No, they're inflicting their will. You know, what about choice? These are sentient beings. This is an older species than we are. They've been here 1.7 million years. We've been here 200,000 years. Where do we get off telling that species, that which is probably a more successful species? I don't think we're going to live another 100,000 years. I think the human race is going to go extinct. But they've been here 1.7 million years. We got to, that is a successful species. That is something we need to really be in awe. You know, how did it survive that long? We need answers. We need to understand that, but no one's asking because everybody's too worried about money and ego.
So if, because we're just about out of time, so if people wanted to read about this and get in touch with you, how would be the best way to do that?
Okay, well, we're doing a national launch for Wild Horse Fire Brigade. It's coming up. We've got about 100 30-second and informational videos with different experts. I'll be in a few of them myself. And we're talking about the wild horses and what's important from their perspective. Forget what we think. It's what's important, natural selection, nature, from their perspective. What do they need? Nobody bothers to ask them what they need. We just say, well, here's what we think you need. Nobody's asking them. Well, you can actually, in a way, ask them by watching them closely and seeing what they need. So Wild Horse Fire Brigade will be coming online in a pretty big way. Our new website will be coming up in about 2 weeks. I think it should be live. So it's going to have a whole bunch of eye candy. We're going to have a lot of great videos, we're going to have indexed research and scientific studies supporting what we know happened in the past in North America. Going back the Pliocene period and earlier, there was never catastrophic fire because we had enough megafauna. We had large body herbivores, horses, bison, all these critters eating, and millions more than today, eating the grass. There was no such thing as catastrophic fire. And we had climate change back then. We had more CO2, less CO2, hotter planet, cooler planet, had it all. 1.7 million years, never had catastrophic fire. It's brand new. And it's because we've killed all the big herbivores. And now we're killing one of the last most important one, the e-Kabbalah. So Wild Horse Fire Brigade will be online in a big way in about 2 weeks. Our website will be up, and it's just like it sounds, wildhorsefirebrigade.org or .com, doesn't matter, you'll get there. We're working on publishing some new papers. Right now I'm co-authoring a paper with a PhD scientist in wildfire. He's got his master's degree in forest science at Oregon State. He's got his PhD in wildfire. He's been around a long time. He's a forester. I think he said he personally has planted 3 million trees.
Wow.
He had a forestry, reproduction company. They went out and replanted forests after fires. So this gentleman knows and he's on our advisory board on top of it. We've built I think a very good advisory board. We've got some scientists. We've got somebody with a legal background, equine advocate. We're building basically Wild Horse Fire Brigade LLC. And so we're going to have a really good team of people who are in it for the horses. We're all volunteers. We're not in it for the money or the ego. We want to see horses rewilded and happy and conserved in large herds. I'd like to see herds up here in the wilderness areas that are 500 to 1,000 horses strong, okay? And we have places we can do that are economically and ecologically appropriate. So we're going to launch the site. People will be able to go there. We're going to have Instagram, Rumble, TikTok, Facebook stuff going on. So it should be fun. It'll be informative. We're going to have a lot of new information that I've actually documented. We're going to put it out there so people can learn for themselves the important lives. I mean, the life of a horse is mostly misunderstood. A wild horse, mostly misunderstood. And so the truth is going to give people a new way of managing horses. And
well,
so I'm pretty excited about
it. Let's hope that we can save our wild horses while we still have them. So we are out of time, but that was a great talk. I learned a lot. I hope everybody else learns a lot. So we will look forward to the website, and I'll put it up myself when I'm done with this. All the links that you sent me. So until next time, Will. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. So long.
Bye-bye.